Good afternoon and welcome to those here. Welcome to our T3 committee and those listening on council audio. Today's Tuesday, June 18th. Chairman Buscaino, joined here by my colleague, Councilmember Mike Bonin. Mr. Bonin, if I can direct you the attention to the agenda. So what we have before us here, I would recommend we take on consent items 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7, unless you want to hold any on the desk.
No, that's fine.
Okay, we do have cards on all those items, so let's take those now. Eric Previn, come forward. Last call for Eric Previn. Oh, here you are. So you're going to have 3 minutes, 2 minutes on all the items, and 1 on general public comment. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Councilmember Buscaino, Mr. Bonin, and City Attorney Hong, who is present today. I believe City Attorney Hong was present at the Greg Smith-led meeting in this very room, or one next door.
What item are you speaking on?
I'm speaking
Hold this clock.
Well, I believe 1 and 5. No?
Okay. Anything to do with Mr. Hong? No?
Well, Hong
Okay,
is
stick
the
to the
city
items.
attorney.
You know what to do. Stick
No,
to the
I
item,
do,
please.
I do.
Thank
And
you
I
very
would like
much.
to say
Continue.
that when you have multiple items on an agenda, as you do, and you take the opportunity when a member of the public steps out to speak in Bonin's meeting, transportation, for example, just as an example, and these are about the agenda.
Okay, you just forfeited your time. Give him his 1 minute of general public comment, please. You know the routine.
Right.
Go ahead.
So the routine is that little fuckers like you stand up and
Go ahead.
say the meeting is closed, public comment is closed as soon as a person goes to the bathroom, which is completely inappropriate. And when you do that, when you behave that way, you don't act like a police officer or a council member. You act like a petty little brat. And it was not you, to be fair, but I don't like your attitude and I disregard what you just said about closing out the items. I would say that Greg Smith, who violated the lifetime ban on lobbying subsequent to serving as a council member, but Heather Holt and the half-baked losers who work in the Ethics Commission simply rubber stamped it and allowed him to serve for what amounts to be several months, maybe 9 months, but he couldn't possibly serve to save us the entire cost of a special election to elect your little friend, Mitchell Englander's sexual harassment associate. So I would just simply say, think twice before you slam the door on the public in the future, Mr. Buscaino, and discuss it with your friend Greg Smith tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Previn. Okay, Wayne, same thing with you. Split and be reminded to speak on the items. So you have 2 minutes of all the items that you pulled and 1 minute general public comment.
So item number 1 is Diane Middleton of the Board of Harbor Commissioners. The fucking cunt! No, and number 1. We don't want anybody else, especially if she's fat. We don't want anybody else on the Board of Harbor Commissioners. Keep the cake away from the fat cunts. Number 2, the industrial, economic, and Paula, fuck you. Item 3 is Bonin. The world airports, the world's worst fucking airport, and the power outage. You see, this is what happens. First, you goddamn order a couple of kids on Amazon and they give you black ones by accident, and then he shuts down the fucking goddamn airport for not paying the water bill. You fucking faggot, Mike Bonin. How come you can't turn on the electricity to a fucking airport? What happens when the planes come in? And we're trying to land. Help! Mayday! Mayday! And what the fuck happens? We don't have any lights. We don't have any fucking electricity in a fucking airport. Never heard of backup generators. Never heard of solar power. Never heard of fire pits involving gas, natural gas turbine, goddamn systems. Oh, you're going to turn them off. Mike Bonin, I'm Mr. Energy. I'm going to turn off all the natural gas turbine power in the city so that the airport can lose fucking electricity and everybody can suffer a future fucking panic attack, you stupid fucking faggot. Turn on the electricity, turn on the goddamn gas, and let's get some electricity into that fucking airport.
So yes, now the 1 minute is a good point. You guys do run your meetings just like gangster thugs. And Zumba Dog referred to you, Mr. Chairman, as the cop with the silver tongue. And that's really what it is. You got no answers. The only thing you did was you wore that badge and beat enough homeless people over the years, and finally they gave you a chair and seat at the city council. That's the only reason you're here. You're here because you're a fucking dud. That's why you're here. Bonin's here because he's a drug addict and a dud. You're the perfect fucking assholes to be running a city that's bankrupt. That's why you're here. You're here because you're fucking losers. I don't want anybody here that's a winner. Does anybody on that council run a business, a hot dog stand? No. You either worked in government, you run drugs, a pimp, or a loser. Fuck you.
Okay. Are there mobile showers outside, Mr. Bonin? Do we know?
Not 5 days a week, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, okay. Thursdays? Okay, thank you. Let's see, is there a, you're disrupting the meeting. Last warning. Okay. Okay. You know what, can you remove him? He's disrupting this meeting after he's been warned. Thank you very much.
You want to insult somebody, you fucking gray-haired fucking pig of a fucking cop.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that he continues to disrupt this meeting. Thank you so much.
You're a fucking pussy.
Off you go.
That's nothing but bullshit.
Have a blessed day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. Do we have a Tom Scott here? Tom? No? Okay. All right. Let's back to regular scheduling here. Let's, Mr. Bond, I'm going to recommend that we take on consent 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Sounds good.
Okay. Without objection, that'll be the order. Send those to council. Let's take item number 2. If you can please read item number 2 into the agenda, please.
Item
Into
2,
the
Port of
record,
LA
rather.
report relative to the Industrial, Economic, and Administrative Survey of the Port of Los Angeles and recommendations for improving the department's business practices.
Ms. Blevins, thank you for being here. We have our CFO, Harbor Department.
Thank you. Hi.
Good afternoon. Sorry for the disruptions.
It's all right.
So you want to report on the controller's Industrial, Economic, and Administrative Survey recommendations?
Sure, and I'm available to answer any questions that you might have. The report made a number of recommendations covering certain areas. We were asked to report back on areas 1 and 2, having to do with our business model, as well as recommendations on the commercial waterfront side. On I'll just kind of hit the highlights on the major recommendations for each section. One of the primary ones they made is that we do joint capital planning with the Port of Long Beach. And so we do have a long history of collaborating with the Port of Long Beach on a number of initiatives. Back in the 90s, we did the 2020 plan, which was an infrastructure plan. We're currently working on the Clean Air Action Plan with the Port of Long Beach. And we continue to administer and manage the Alameda Corridor, as well as the ICTF rail yard for the UP, as well as various supply chain efficiency initiatives and security initiatives. And as we are developing our next long-term capital plan, the 2050 plan, we will kind of keep in mind what the Port of Long Beach is undertaking in consideration of our long-term capital plans.
Wonderful. Appreciate that. I see Mr. Christensen's here, representing the Port of Long Beach. No? What are you here for? Oh, airport. What am I thinking? That's right. He's at LAWA. You're bouncing around all over the place, but you're not going far, right? Okay, got it. Good to see you, Mike. So tell me about the 2050 plan. Can you share with us when that plan will be unveiled?
Certainly. We're hoping for no later than the first quarter of 2021. Our goal is, though, the end of 2020.
By next year?
Yes.
And as it relates to one of the recommendations on preparing a long-term capital investment development plan with the port, other than the CAP, the Clean Air Action Plan, any other projects that the two ports are working collectively on?
Yes, we're currently in the midst of working on a joint rail study with the Port of Long Beach to just optimize our rail capabilities, and that will also be incorporated into our 2050 plan as well. And we also work on port security initiatives as well as advocacy in Washington and Sacramento for funding for our infrastructure projects.
And as far as like working together on grant funding opportunities as well.
Yes, over the course of the last 2.5 years, we have applied jointly with the Port of Long Beach on 4 grant opportunities, and we have received one most recently from the California Transportation Commission, and we received $27.5 million, and the Port of Long Beach received $14 million, and that is to go to support rail projects.
Another recommendation is to consider enhancing container terminal pricing. Includes charges to container shipping lines and evaluate the feasibility of the transportation infrastructure investment fee. Can you be more specific about what pricing strategies have been implemented, and how's the competition with other U.S. ports come into play on this recommendation?
Certainly. We have implemented CPI or Consumer Price Index increases quite aggressively in recent years into our leases with our tenants. We do have minimum annual guarantees in place. We do hope to peg those to our targeted rate of returns as recommended in the IAS report. The other 2 primary recommendations are certainly have merit to them, but we can't unilaterally implement those changes. One, bifurcating the charges between the terminal operators and the shipping lines. Given the current relationships and how the industry has changed, and that we don't have a contractual relationship directly with the decision makers of where the cargo goes, that recommendation certainly has merit, but we can't make the decision unilaterally, so we'll continue to kind of take that under advisement, and as opportunities to negotiate the permits come up, we'll look into that.
Okay. A couple more. That's one I pointed out. On the nonprofit, those tenants who are nonprofits and those who have older leases, how are we as far as does your leasing policy reflect an opportunity for these nonprofits to grow as their leases are renewed or renegotiated?
Mm-hmm. So we currently have 19 nonprofits that lease space at the port, and they either pay zero or not a whole lot. And in exchange for that, they're expected to, one, be a legitimate nonprofit, have insurance, meet certain requirements, as well as provide a bona fide public benefit to the surrounding community. And so we measure that, and we expect that the service that they're providing is commensurate with the amount of the free rent that they're getting. Some of the tenants include kind of larger tenants such as Alta Sea, and the Boys and Girls Club and Los Angeles Maritime Institute, and then some smaller ones are Harbor Area Gang Alternatives, Eastview Little League, etc. And so we do for those nonprofit tenants that are occupying larger space or prime locations at the port, we are working on ways to try to incentivize them to invest more into their property in order to better utilize the space, or look for other alternatives for them to be, so that we can better use that space, but still have the nonprofit present at the port.
Appreciate that. And then lastly, one of the recommendations was to explore the feasibility of new development and leasing opportunities compatible with the regulations of the California State Tidelands Trust. And as Mr. Christensen can attest to, that can be archaic at times. It's just a little bit, right? How old is that Tidelands Trust? What dates back to what?
I don't know.
Goes way back, I
yeah.
believe, into the
Like a century.
1800s,
It's early
1900s. So has there been an appetite from the port to start challenging the state on really looking beyond, there's so many restrictions, in a time where we're thirsting for housing up and down the state of California, not just our port, but, and I know there's been other ports like Oakland and San Diego who have done a good job of land swapping and putting housing on Port Tidelands property.
Well, we are currently pursuing, as you're well aware, commercial opportunities at the port, namely the San Pedro Public Market, kind of other more innovative uses such as Alta-C. Later on this year, we hope to release an RFP for the Warehouse 1 property, and we're also looking at some different alternatives for the Maritime Museum property as well. But in terms of, we currently don't have plans to make an effort to change the Tidelands Trust. While your concern about housing is noted, the port does have concerns of the impact that adding housing to the port would have on future development opportunities for industrial property, just
Right.
in the way of environmental impact studies and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we celebrate the fact that we are one of the cleanest ports in the world, and I believe that argument can be made to say that we're looking at our emissions we reduced emissions by 80-90%, and we're marching towards zero emissions port. So I think that's something that we can work together with as a coalition of ports up and down the coast and up and down the state to look at ways to start challenging this Tidelands Trust. Too archaic. I think, Mr. Bonin, you good? Well, thank you so much, Marla, for the presentation.
Certainly.
I want to also thank Controller Galperin for this IES study and also recommendations both by his office. Thank you for responding to them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll receive and file this item and move to our final discussion item, which is item number 3.
Item 3, motion Bond and Weston instructing the Los Angeles World Airports and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to report relative to the June 5th, 2019 power outage at LAX, and how security policies allowed for checked bags to be returned to passengers after they had cleared Transportation Security Administration screening.
From the Port of Long Beach again, Mr. Christensen is here. Oh. So I'll kick this over to Mr. Bonin. No, this was quite the disruption that impacted airports not only here but throughout the country, and I'll tee it up for Mr. Bonin.
And not the first, although certainly not as, I guess, severe in terms of the outage as what happened in 2018, although potentially more severe in terms of the security issues. So I'll start with just the general question: what the hell happened?
Councilmember Bonin, Councilmember Buscaino, Mike Christensen, Deputy Executive Director at Los Angeles World Airports. Just crossed my 2-year mark. Happy to be back in the LA family.
In the LA side, right. Appreciate that.
He didn't get the memo.
Obviously, in 2 years.
I've been a moving target. And yes, to your earlier question, yes, there is a lot of work going on between the two ports.
Yeah, sure.
On about 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, the 5th of June, and I might mention I'm joined by Daniel Barnes from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and he can speak to those issues, and our own Airport Police Chief Maggart, who's going to speak to the issues related to
let's
security.
do the power failure first, and then the security issue second.
So one of the underground high voltage power lines we refer to as the Airport Peddler A or AirPed A faulted, shorted out about 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 5th at a location that's right across from Park 1. Councilman Bonin, you'll know that well, near 98th Street and Sepulveda. The impact of that was that all buildings and all terminals in our central terminal area lost power. Every one of our terminals has redundant feeds, has 2 feeds. AirPed A is the primary feed on most of those buildings, and then they also had a backup feed. The automatic transfer switches functioned in every case within seconds of the original outage, except for 4 locations. 4 ATSs did not function. And those were the ones that fed Terminal 1, which is Southwest Airlines, Terminals 7 and 8, which is United, and our administration building, Admin East, which also feeds 2 of our parking structures, Parking Structure 1 and 7, and some of the traffic signals that are east of the theme building. So while we were rebooting systems, TSA was rebooting their checkpoints, we were turning escalators back on, which took just a short period. Those 3 terminals and those air operations associated with those 3 terminals stayed down. So we communicated immediately with DWP. They confirmed the outage. They dispatched crews somewhere between 6:30 and 7, they were headed out to the site to try to figure out what was going on. In the meantime, we were waiting to see if there would be any automatic transfers, which there were not, and then moved forward with tending to our generators. Now, each of those 3 terminals has emergency backup power, or emergency standby power. All those generators functioned. They kicked over. But those generators only power emergency lighting and fire life safety systems. They do not power the boarding bridges or the baggage handling systems or the other systems that are required for screening passengers. So approximately 9 p.m., actually 9:23 p.m., DWP's crews were able to make it to Terminal 8, or Terminal 7, I should say, and within moments they were able to find their way into the substation and turn power on. About 15 minutes later, they turned power back on to Terminal 8, so 7 and 8 were on, and a second crew made its way into Terminal 1 and got Terminal 1 reactivated. Then about somewhere around 10:30, we were able to get the Admin East turned back on, which brought us traffic signals and the 2 parking structures. So we were back in business on single feeds to 3 of our terminals, actually to all of our terminals. DWP stayed on the job for the rest of the night trying to find the spot. Mr. Barnes can speak to their efforts. We did discover early Thursday morning that one of the lines that was providing backup grid power to the south terminals had been damaged. DWP effected repairs on that line to stabilize it, because at that point we were quite worried that we were in single source power on South Complex with that line at risk. So they effected repairs quickly on the sheathing on that line, got that stabilized. They spent the rest of the day locating the problem on Airpad A, which they found. They usually it takes about 48 hours is what they said to replace the cable. They replaced it in about 6 or 8 hours. So by about 6 p.m. Thursday night, Airpad A was re-energized, and by midnight, they had put redundant power to all of our terminals that had been restored. And so that played out on Thursday. So that's the basic scenario for the power outage.
And what was the impact on operations at the airport and on the national or international flight patterns?
Well, there were two impacts. One was for the actual power outage that played out through the evening on Wednesday. June the 5th, there were 47 flights canceled or diverted. There were about 7,000 passengers impacted. Southwest Airlines ceased outgoing operations approximately 8:30 when they couldn't get an assurance that they would return power. So that impacted about 1,500 passengers that then sheltered in Terminal 1. And Chief Maggard can tell you about that situation. Now, the Terminal 1 dump and rescreen had a separate impact. That was about 18 flights that were canceled or diverted, and about 3,500 passengers impacted on Thursday morning from the ancillary effects of that.
And those are, when you talk about canceled flights, those are LAX flights?
The canceled flights would be outbound flights.
Right.
The diverted flights would have been the inbounds.
Right.
And those numbers included both canceled and diverted.
But that had a ripple effect on other airports and everything else.
Yes, it did. And we don't have specifics on what those ripple effects were other than the number of passengers impacted directly, which I had mentioned.
So what is the likelihood of this type of condition that caused this outage happening again, either here or elsewhere around an airport with aging infrastructure and one hell of a lot of construction?
Good afternoon again. Yeah, my name's Dan Barnes. I'm the Director of Power Transmission and Distribution, LEDWP. Mike laid it out pretty well. It's very unusual. Each one of these terminals have an ATS, an automatic transfer switch. And so when we lose one circuit, the switch rolls over to the others. To have 4 of them fail is unprecedented, if you will. We've reached out across the country to see if other utilities have had this issue, and no, it doesn't. They've never had an issue like this where the ATSs have failed to roll that many at one time. So very unusual, and we're looking in to see what the cause is. To answer your question, it's unlikely. We actually had another relay this morning due to a bird, and the ATS rolled like it should have. So, LAX saw a 2-second outage at their Bradley terminals, but it operated as it should. So, it shouldn't happen like this, and we're still in the investigative portion of this to find out why this happened and why we had the 4
When do you
ATSs.
think you'll have a better idea?
Hopefully here in the next couple of weeks.
Next couple of weeks, okay.
Yes, sir.
Back in, there was the big squirrel caused outage in 2015, then I believe in February 2016, I think, was it 2016? There was, no, it was 2018, there was another big outage, and after that, we sort of got DWP and LAWA working together more closely. A report came to a joint meeting of this committee and Energy and Environment, which happens to be meeting at the same time today. And it outlined a number of things that were scheduled to happen by early 2020 and a number of other things that were going to take a little bit longer, more than 24 months. Offhand, but I'm going to ask for a written report anyway, but offhand, do you happen to know how we're doing on the things that are supposed to be done in 6 or 7 months?
I can address some of those, Council Member. We immediately started after those incidents you mentioned, meeting regularly. We meet as a team every month, myself included, along with representatives from DWP. We have a standing list of agenda items which have to do with power quality, along with the capital programs. One of the issues was to move towards the development of a new receiving station, RSX. That MOU is in place, so we're ready to move on that. It's a large expense. It's in our capital budget. DWP is doing a lot of the work on that as well. So we're partnered in moving that forward. Some of the other specific issues we'll have to respond to in the report because I'm not too familiar with them. But some of the other things that are happening from recent and the most recent power outage involve protocols, communication protocols. We developed those earlier in the year. We're going to revisit those at an after action we're going to do tomorrow, in fact, which will have DWP participation, particularly the automatic transfer switch review they're doing. In the meantime, we've put in place processes that should an ATS fail again, and the solution to that is putting people there and then manually switching it. We have a whole different approach we're going to take with DWP's crews to go in so that we minimize the time. Knowing there is also discussions with DWP over putting some kind of automatic notifications on the ATSs.
Right.
They do not now have that, so they don't have visibility in that.
Right. So in a written report, and you assume you'll have some answers in 2 weeks. Let's ask for a report within 30 days, both on the causes of this. But what I'd like to do is in response to Council File 170971S2, which was my motion after that. DWP and LAWA had a joint response with an action plan and a timeline, and it had 9 immediate actions currently in progress, 5 short-term actions to be done by January 2020, and 3 with multiple subheadings, long-term mitigations, which would be completed beyond 24 months. I'd like to get a status report on all of those. Are they still meeting the projected timelines, or have we encountered hurdles? And are there other things that we have added subsequently or substituted as a result of the monthly meetings that the two agencies have been doing?
Okay, we'd certainly do that, Councilman.
Yeah. The nightmare scenario is what happened in Atlanta, and we keep having these sort of, short nightmare precognition experiences, and we don't want to get there. And My fear is because we have such an aging infrastructure and we have a lot of work to do to get it done. And there's so much stuff that's going to be happening over the next few years with not just the APM, but all the different terminal modernizations and Terminal Zero and all that, that we're just setting ourselves up for a perfect storm. So I want to make sure that we're as prepped as possible.
And Councilmember, that shook us quite heavily, especially the next morning when we found out that one of those lines had sustained some damage.
Yeah.
So what we have done in the very short term between now and when you see this report, we've acquired 3 more 2-megawatt generators. We now have 5 2-megawatt generators, and we have the capability of powering terminals 1, 2, Bradley, 4, and 7 in that doomsday scenario if we lose power long enough to move those over and connect them.
Right.
And then we'll tell you some other measures we're taking related to both near-term hard-point connections for the generators at each terminal. And we are concerned, too, about the construction, potential construction impact, which would be isolated or would be local, but would still be very impactful, along with the longer-term energy use studies that we've initiated, which I think you'd be interested in seeing. We'll let you know about that.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So the other issue. I'll ask the same question. What the hell happened?
Yeah. Good afternoon, council members. Dave Maggard, the Airport Police Chief. So, as you heard, as a result of the overnight power outage, Terminal 1 was impacted heavily, and of course that's where Southwest resides. They canceled a number of their flights. Some of what had occurred to compound this was there had been bags that, of course, were separated from screened passengers already loaded on the flights. At some point, once those canceled flights occurred, a lot of people were then stuck waiting for an early morning departure, and so they stayed inside the terminals. At some point overnight, I don't want to make too many assumptions on behalf of the airline, there was some requests and a belief that it would be appropriate to connect the people who had already loaded baggage on those flights that were eventually canceled and reunite them with the passengers.
People wanted to get changed to brush their teeth.
Exactly. And so what had happened, what I understand is that there had been an initial desire to try and reunite them in a public area. But unfortunately, many of the bags, we found out later that morning, had been reunited with the passengers in the sterile area. And so, of course, there's a variety of different kinds of things that could be in those bags. And once TSA discovered that, they made a decision just before 6 o'clock that they needed to remove everybody from Terminal 1 and rescreen everyone. And so they requested that we do that. There's about 1,500 passengers inside Terminal 1 at that point, and then you can imagine several hundred coming to Terminal 1, arriving in the morning for those flights. So we had a significant number of people that were then out in the public area and really curbside. Fortunately, we had our midnight shift and our day shift working at the same time, and we were able to get people out safely and quickly. And then it's our responsibility, especially with our canine teams, to do a sweep of that terminal, make sure everything's cleared. And then within a fairly short period of time, about 45 minutes or so, TSA started screening employees, and then immediately after that, they started rescreening the people that had already been there overnight. So it was an inconvenience for them, certainly. We were fortunate to have a lot of people there to support those efforts, and we were able to accomplish that in about an hour's time.
I appreciate everything that you and your team did. I'm curious how we got into the predicament in the first place. Who at the airport is authorized to make the decision to release the baggage into the sterile areas?
Well, that should have been a call that TSA made, and unfortunately, it didn't happen that night, and that's where the failure occurred.
So the airline made the decision.
They did.
And what has TSA had to say since then?
They're conducting a comprehensive investigation, which is not yet completed.
I mean, I'm assuming that that's not the way it happened is not a protocol you're comfortable with.
Correct. Absolutely.
Do we know, has this happened in other places? I mean, it seems like a pretty significant breach.
There are times when we have to rescreen passengers. I'm not aware of a scenario like this occurring. I haven't heard of that, and in my conversations with our TSA leadership, it's something that's very unusual.
And how well does TSA keep us in the loop on their inquiry?
Very, very well. In fact, I had in preparation for coming before you today, I had a conversation with our federal security director. They're still investigating what occurred.
Is there anything we can do? I mean, is there anything we can do in the future that requires us or you to have prior notification before something like this happens, so that we're at least aware? I mean, I assume you didn't know until after the fact.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it's our responsibility to stay well connected. I mean, we have a good relationship with all of our tenants, our airlines, as does TSA. We have a tight relationship with TSA as well. So it shouldn't have happened. I wouldn't expect it to happen again. And it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that we have close enough ties with people that would be in those decision-making positions to make sure that we lean on each other even in the middle of the night, which we're accustomed to doing.
Yeah, I'd like to know from either you or from the executive director's office, is there anything we can do as the landlord of the airport to make sure that there's a protocol in place? TSA obviously has the sign off on that, but we're at least aware of it, so we can say, whoa, there's going to be a problem with this, or so that we can properly deploy, or that we can better notify people. It just seems like there's that our being stuck in the bystander role is unfair to you, and it's unfair to your officers. It's unfair to everybody at the airport.
That's correct. I think that I don't want to speak for TSA, but I think if they were here, they would tell you that those practices and protocols and even our history every day together are in place. I can appreciate, and it's something that we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks, so that make sure that that doesn't happen again. But TSA has, as you know, very strict rules about people and baggage and where they go and how they get there. And so it's a scenario that we don't expect to occur again, and of course we've learned a lot from it.
I mean, this stuff is always sort of a mixed blessing. We've now seen a vulnerability that we can plug up. On the other hand, when stuff like this happens, always wondering, was someone trying to do something and this would have been the opportunity for it? Are people testing in some way our systems and trying to figure out what some of our vulnerabilities are? And stuff like this just scares the hell out of me.
And Councilmember Bonin, the after action meeting tomorrow will result in a report. Mm-hmm. All of those players will be there. The airlines will be there. TSA will be there, along with the chief's team and our operations team. So we're pushing that as a lesson learned. We're pushing it pretty hard, right, particularly with our airline partners.
Yeah.
And there will be a report coming out of it. We'd be glad to share that report with your office.
If you could share sort of a summary of that as part of the 30-day report back I was asking for.
Absolutely, yes.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonin. I had a question for Mr. Barnes, the DWP. The ATS, I understand if one fails, but 4 failures, correct?
Yes.
Is there a plan to replace those or look at?
Well, that's part of what we're looking at right now, but we have gone in and tested each one of those ATSs, mm-hmm, and they have operated as they should under the test. We went in that night after we got both circuits back on. They rolled them back and forth, and they operated like they should, so under test. Again, these are very reliable pieces of equipment. We've never had issues in the past, and so this is something we're looking into right now is why.
Is there a way to use technology to remotely monitor the ATSs?
We can remotely monitor circuits, and that's something we're looking in, and the RSX that we're putting in that will have all the, mm-hmm, modern technology in, so they'll be able to monitor all this to see. These ATSs, all we can do now is put something on them that's a tattletale, so our crews know what status they're in.
Just think with technology today, yes, we're looking at ways to be a smarter city and preventive ways to really monitor these circuits and doing so remotely.
I would just
I
like to
just-
add, we are, like Mike mentioned, we are meeting regularly now. And like Councilmember Bonin, it's a mixed blessing. So it's unfortunate that it happened, but it is putting us at a more elevated, where we are looking at things and working more closely with LAX. And so this won't happen again, and we will be more timely in response.
One of the outshoots of that discussion, council members, that we're looking at actually working with DWP to put a DWP crew or two on LAWA property, which will help on our response
Nice.
time as well.
All right, good to know. So, Mike, do you want to continue this next 30 days? Let's do that. And I know we have some report backs as well, including, I believe, you'll get more information for the DWP in the next 2 weeks. So let's continue this item to our next meeting upon return from our summer recess. Okay. All right. We don't have a date on that just yet, John, right?
Council members, your next scheduled meeting is Tuesday, August 6th.
Okay. Good enough?
Thank
Thanks, Chief. Thanks for your report. Okay, with that, that was our final agenda item. We're now adjourned. Have a good day.